Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Something that I want you to consider. A person's own experiences will impact how they advise you and how they view certain scenarios. So, for example, if you go to a person who is in a very difficult relationship, is in a very difficult marriage, and in an abusive marriage, in a marriage where they particularly don't like their husband, for example, then when they look and they reflect on marriage, they are going to very likely going to have a negative approach to marriage, and they're going to have a negative outlook on men in general. Likewise, if you go to a man who doesn't like his wife, or he has a wife who he's having a lot of trouble with, and he's having a very troublesome marriage, then when he looks at marriage or he looks at women, he's going to have a negative approach. That's on an individual basis. But if you were then to approach one of these people for marriage advice, then how do you think that their outlook would impact the type of advice that they're going to give you? Okay, so if you have a woman who is not happy in her marriage, okay, and she therefore thinks or she has a very negative impression of men, and then you go and you start saying to this woman, this is what my problems are with my husband, and this is what I am going through, and X and Y and Z, then how do you think that this woman is going to advise you? She doesn't have a positive outlook on marriage in the first place. She is therefore more likely to advise you with a destructive type of advice rather than a constructive type of advice. She is more likely to say to you, leave him. You can do better. You don't need him in your life. You are better than him. You don't need to stand for this, because she is simply going to reflect all of her problems onto you. Okay, and that is something that you have to be so careful of when you are seeking advice from a person, is that that person is qualified and is able and in the right frame of mind to be able to advise you. Brothers and sisters, this is one of the biggest things that leads to divorce, in my opinion, is the fact that we go to the wrong people who are simply not qualified or well placed to give us advice, and we trust them with our situation, and we lend them an ear, and we actually take on board what they say when in reality it shouldn't be heard. That's the first thing. On top of that, we have people who are downright jealous of us. Therefore, when they advise us, they may advise us with soft words and all of that, but in reality, they want to see our downfall because of jealousy or evil which is within them. On top of that, we put people who are not qualified or they don't have experience, and we go and ask them for advice. So we go and ask our younger sisters who are unmarried, or our younger sisters who are 15 or 16 or 18 or 20 years old, and we ask them for advice when frankly they are not worthy of being turned to for advice on these issues. So advice is not sought from everybody, and even when advice is sought, you need to look at the direction and the point of view of the person who is giving you advice, and you need to make sure that you're not ignorant and that you have the ability that when you turn to somebody for advice, you have the ability to weigh up that advice and think, how is that advice going to affect me? How is that advice going to affect my future? How is that advice going to affect my family, my children, my parents, my spouse, my own situation? Please be people who, when you turn to someone from advice, you don't flush your own common sense down the drain, and more importantly, you turn to the right people for advice. The people who are practicing, the people who are older, the people who are experienced, the people who are mature, the people who fear Allah. And importantly, when it comes to marriage advice, is you should turn to marriage positive people, people who are in a good marriage, in a positive marriage. You need to turn to them for marriage advice, because they will give you constructive marriage advice. They're not going to rush to see you divorce, because they have a positive a positive image and a positive feeling with regards to marriage. So inshallah they're going to try and give that to you as well. And perhaps they weren't at one stage in a positive marriage. They had to work on it and they had to fight to get to that good stage that they're at now. So therefore they will give you constructive, useful, practical advice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us. Wa jazakumullahu khaira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.